from the time we're in the womb to the time we're born, our nervous systems are tracking, is the world safe? Is the world not safe? And our parents and the relationships we have around us are laying the foundation of how honest can I be? How safe is the world?
We have someone with us today that I have been really looking forward to introducing to you. Her name is Brooke Hadley. Brooke is a clinical counselor at Mississippi Centers right here in Sterling, Illinois, where she works with women and families. Her focus is trauma. She's trained in TFCBT and internal family systems, so she really understands how trauma lives not just in our thoughts, but in our bodies and our nervous system. But before all of that, Brooke spent 10 years inside the church and nonprofit world. Brooke doesn't help women heal from the outside looking in. She has lived it. She walked away from a system that no longer felt safe or right for her after years of enduring more than what most people would ever know. And she came out the other side on a mission to reclaim her own mind and body. She's a mom of a little girl who is 5, and Brooke will tell you motherhood is its own kind of adventure. What I love about Brooke is that she took her own healing journey and turned it into something bigger than herself, helping other women know that they were never crazy, that healing is possible, and that they deserve it. Brooke, if somebody had told you 5 years ago that you'd be sitting here today helping other women heal from trauma and reclaim their lives, what do you think you would have said?
I think in that moment, it would have probably felt impossible, or more just like, that sounds really cool. And maybe I'll never experience that, but wow, that would be amazing. So even like as we're starting and recording, I have like full body chills, just like, wow, thinking 5 years back, this conversation, this position of my career and talking to other women like this, that was not a thing for me 5 years ago. So
And it's such an amazing journey that you've had. And I want to kind of dig more into why you chose to kind of get into the field that you're in and how even entering that field helped you resolve some of your own traumas in your life.
yeah, I think for me, for honestly, most of my life, just felt this internal voice, this internal narrative of whether it was systems or conversations where something just felt off. I felt like there was more healing to understand, there was more connection with myself, even from the spiritual piece, there was more understanding to unlock. And at times, the answers or conversations or systems or communities that I was in, I just felt this aching and this longing that there was more there for me to discover. And so, like you had mentioned, I worked in ministry as a worship arts director for years. And I loved that. I loved the connection of people and the spirituality and the intimacy that comes from that. But there were so many conversations that I was having with people that I just felt like, I wish I knew more. I wish there was more to give, more understanding. And so that is what kind of led me to go more into this therapy world of understanding God as creator, understanding my mind, my body, and my nervous system. And that's really kind of what perpetuated this new kind of trajectory for me.
That's amazing. Your story is just one of incredible resilience and healing. And I think there's so many women out there that needs to hear this. So we only know this Brooke. Can you take us back to a moment when you first realized the life you were living wasn't the life that you were meant to stay in? Who was that Brooke before she found her voice and started reclaiming her life?
Yeah, that Brooke was very, very anxious, very, very stressed. Like, even if I just look at it from a physical standpoint, like sick all the time, like if a cold came through town, if a flu came through town, like I was going to get it. I was going to be sick, chronic headaches, physical pain, just always anxious and on edge and seeking perfectionism for kind of this delusion of safety of like, if I can stay and operate in this place of perfectionism, if I can be what everyone needs me to be, and I can be the perfect wife and the perfect daughter and the perfect Christian, it'll guarantee me this safety. And I was kind of in this idea of That's emotional intensity equals spiritual like awakenings and discipline, and exhaustion is just this constant outpouring of just caring for others. And so I think I was just so intense and exhausted and just driving and trying to be perfect, that there was no off switch of letting my life feel soft, letting my body relax and feel soft and simple. That Brooke was just go, 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 push, push, push. Yeah.
Full agenda all the time, always something to do,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Never take. Was there a point, I guess, through this healing, like when did you finally prioritize Brooke? Do you remember like thinking, I'm doing this for me?
I think the moment that I finally was able to put myself first, I think there was two big things that happened in my life. Number one, was the birth of my daughter. And it kind of caused this reflection of, is it sustainable what I'm doing? And now that I have her, would I want her to like copy and paste my life? Like, would I want her to have these same feelings? Would I want her to feel this same intensity, this exhaustion, this perfectionism, these expectations? And when I realized that after her birth, that was huge for me of like, no, it's a gift to myself and it's a protection for even her long term to really examine these systems and these cycles and this lifestyle of, is this sustainable for me? And then once I got into my master's program, and it was finally a safe space to ask some of these big questions, and that I wasn't being labeled as an outlier or argumentative or not a team player or not being spiritually honoring, and that these questions were met with understanding, then I feel like Brooke just came alive of like, I've held these questions in for 29 years. Like, and now I can actually talk about them with other people and it's safe and I'm not too much and I'm not crazy and I have sound thinking and I'm logic. And yeah, so those two things kind of happened within 2 years of each other. And that was like, whoa, this new Brooke is starting to come out and come alive.
So, Brooke, we talked about resilience and you being resilient. Have you learned anything about the human resilience that surprised you?
Think what I've learned with the human resiliency is like we can be like for myself, I can be in a pattern of life for years and it just is reiterated over and over again and it's ingrained in me. But the resiliency of you can reverse some of that, like to not give up on yourself. Like I have so much life, even if it's only 5, 10 more years, like it's worth reversing some of that. And that the mind
Mhm.
and the body is so resilient to be able to pick myself up, put myself on a different trajectory, and to experience healing and life and new thoughts that I never
Mhm.
thought were going to be possible for me.
Wow.
And so that, I mean, I even the other day said to my sister-in-law, I was just like, I sit back and I just look at my life and it's just like, I didn't think this was going to be possible for me. But the resiliency of what the mind and the body and the healing
Mhm.
happen, that it's never too late to try something new and to not give
Mm.
up on yourself because we are so resilient.
Right.
So
So do you think, I'm kind of pulling from, we've had comments of others with other videos we've posted where people say things like, you've never experienced, trauma that others have. Like, you don't know what it's like. Do you think anyone can grow past their traumas and find, I guess, relief in their traumas? Or I'm not sure how to word that right, but do you think that just because we've gone through a trauma that we have to hold on to it forever? What are kind of your thoughts on those types of people who think because they've went through a trauma, like that just defines their life?
I think a lot of times, so when we look at trauma, there's an event, there might be a traumatic event, but the trauma is the shift that happens inside of us of, I went into this and I came out different. And now I'm holding and I'm carrying something that I wasn't holding and carrying before. And so I think part of the healing of the trauma is kind of to that point of, there might be a part of it that I'll always carry inside of me, But the healing comes from when you can talk about the experience, when you can validate your own experience, your own emotions, when the women come into my office and even in my own journey, to not feel like I have to fight for the validity of my trauma, that it can just,
Wow.
and that I can say it out loud. I think a lot of times when there's a little bit of that aggression or defensiveness, it's probably because
Hmm.
that trauma has been devalued or somebody has deflected it or not given it validity. And so, yes, that trauma, again, is that internal shift. And we will probably carry remnants of that. But that thought process shouldn't be like a hopeless thought process. It should more so be this is a part of my story and my journey, but I can heal from it. And the remnants and the pieces that I carry are now tools to help me have further safety in the future, to have further healing in the future, and being able to pass that on to someone else. But I think in my office, the biggest thing that I see is so many people just fighting for the validity and to be have one say, I'm sorry that that happened to you. That was horrible. You should have never had to go through that. And it's valid regardless of what anybody else says. If it impacted you, if it hurt you, if it changed you, if it broke you, then that's true. And we're not going to fight and devalue that piece.
Mm.
Brooke, I just want to say that comment about fighting for the validity of your trauma. Wow. Wow. That's all I can say.
It's interesting how things happen in our lives. I'll say many times happenstance things happen in our lives where it hits us, blindsides us, and we don't think we're going to get through it. And I don't know if all of you have been to that point. I think many women have.
Huh?
But what's amazing is if you have faith, somehow or other, you make it through to the dawn. And I always remembered my godmother saying that no matter how dark it is, how many clouds are there, that the sun is always shining above. And I always spell that S-O-N.
Son. That's
And that
beautiful.
just brought me a peace, a new faith, a new realization that this journey, I think the more crazy and chaotic the journey, the more we're being honed for greatness. And we're
Mm,
being honed to help others in a greater way than we even thought we could do. So I thank you for your journey.
yeah.
And I'm so proud of you for stepping out and being a light to other women as they go on their journey. Because sometimes all it takes is someone that can listen well and validate them as human beings
Mhm.
and validate that what happened to them doesn't define them. And so thank you for doing what you're doing.
Yeah. Of course. And I think, Judy, what you're hitting on is like that the visual of the sun and then the SON is like it's hope. If
Uh-huh.
we feel like there's hope, there's something we can go towards, that healing is possible, that there's more, regardless of what has happened to us. It's that hope. We all need to have hope. When we lose hope, that's when the darkness feels like it's all consuming. But if even
Uh-huh.
there's some little glimmer of light, and when you get the opportunity to show somebody that the light is still there, maybe they can't see it, that is just like, again, full body chills of there's still hope because we're resilient. So yeah, I love that.
And I really think it comes down to all of us being willing to let Christ's light shine through us. You know, we have to go through some dark times sometimes. We go through some crazy, chaotic times sometimes. But the fact we do come through
Uh-huh.
is what gives not only hope to us, but the light that helps others in their journey to see forward. So thank you again.
Yes. Brooke, so yesterday I was talking to a prayer buddy of mine, and I was talking a little bit about your story, the little that I new at the time. And I said to her, there is just no way that I would have made that, because I think it would have altered my faith in such a way that I don't know if I would have been able to come back from that. And she said such a profound thing. And she said, well, that was not your journey, because you are created for the journey that's just for you. And you're equipped for that journey. Because even before you were born, that the scripture that talks about being formed in your mother's womb, God knew that that was going to be part of your journey. And he equipped Brooke Hadley for that. He didn't equip me for that because that wasn't my journey. So my question is, your faith journey. So when the very institution that was supposed to support and protect you failed to do just that, how did you keep your faith from falling apart? How did you not just walked away? And why I'm asking is, I went through something like that and I walked away from my faith. I moved to the United States. I became an atheist, but God knew that. And later on, he brought me back in such a profound way. And now I can see why I had to walk away, because it is part of my journey. It's part of why I can walk up to somebody that's an atheist and I can say to them, I know you hurt. There's hurt there and you can get over it, because I did. So how did you stay? How did you stay in the race? How did you not just say, I'm done with these church people. I'm done with everything related to God and faith?
I think for me, it had to be this really honest examination. I remember my therapist said to me, because I remember feeling like the intimacy of being close to God after what I had gone through, it's too vulnerable. Like I just can't do it. It feels too scary. And I remember her saying to me, it's okay to be honest with yourself that not God himself, but the idea of God was used as an abuse tactic over you to maintain control over you. And I had to sit with that and chew on it of, okay, it's actually two separate things that I'm questioning right now. The part where the pain sits and the hurt sits is more so the human intervention of how they've presented God and his will to me. And then the other side of it was, but who is God? And if I've claimed for years that God can handle my questions, he can handle my pain, then I need to be able to separate it and allow myself the space to deconstruct it if I'm ever going to be able to rebuild it. I can't force myself to just continue saying, I'm going to pray, I'm going to read scripture, la-di-da. I had to say, nope, the idea of God was used as a control and abuse tactic for years in multiple ways, starting from childhood all the way up through adulthood. And I had to separate that of where's the human part, stop, begin and stop, period. And where does God's character and who he is, where does that actually begin in my life? And I think letting myself, it scared a lot of people around me because deconstruction, those words are scary words. But I had to allow myself to go on that journey. And I think that's when I realized that like hypervigilance doesn't equal spiritual maturity. That living in a constant state of fear doesn't mean closeness with God.
Yeah.
And that a lot of these things were trauma responses under the umbrella of religion, and the very system that is trying to fight against certain things is actually the system that's generating some of the pain. And I had to separate it. So that's a really big answer of like, I'm still on that journey, but that is how I've been able to maintain some of that spirituality and keep growing with God in that way.
Wow, Brooke, that is such an incredible answer. I don't think we think like that, most of us, but we do go into this Christianese and we're just like, oh, just pray. Your faith is not strong enough. But to actually be open to say, ask the hard questions. Do you think God cannot understand those? He wants you to bring all of the hurt to him. He can handle it. He created you. So question for you, for women listening to this, and I know that a lot of my friends are anticipating and waiting because it's such a controversial topic, for those women that have gone through something similar, that feels angry and disappointed, or even to some extent abandoned by God because of their own personal experience, what do you want them to know through your experience?
I think first and foremost, let yourself feel the anger. That's like, as women, that is, we avoid anger because of the societal connotations that come with it. Anger equals aggression, and it doesn't. I have, even in my office, my littles, I meet with kids as young as 2, and we're already starting to implement what is the difference between aggression and assertiveness. How do we get comfortable with our anger? And so I think for women, it's like that's where feelings of shame, bitterness, oh, because it's like I'm avoiding the anger. I'm just not letting myself feel it. So that was a huge step for me of just like, I'm mad. I'm angry. This was, an injustice, or I didn't deserve this. And so I think for those women out there that feel those feelings, finding a safe space to just get it all out, an emotional vomiting of like, I think part of it is like, there's not a safe space for me to go with my anger and those feelings of abandonment and frustration. I just have to like internalize it and hold it in. And so it's massive to find that safe space to let yourself just feel all the feels and get all of the things out before you even can figure out what that next step is.
Mhm.
So I hope that kind of answers that question. I might
It
have.
does. It
Yeah.
does. I think you've given us permission to be angry about the things that we're not allowed to come out. We're not allowing that because that is not very societal of an angry woman. You don't want to be a Karen. So thank you for saying that.
Yeah.
It's absolutely amazing. So what would you say is the first step for somebody that feels trapped in a situation and they don't want to be classified as a certain, with certain behavior? What would be the first step that you would encourage somebody like that to take to get out of this, or just to find someone to talk to?
I think that's the biggest thing is you have to find a space to externalize. For me, when I started my master's program, I have this amazing, beautiful friend who's also a therapist named Amanda in Lansing. And it's one of those things where, as women, it's almost like allowing yourself, the first step is kind of let yourself just be messy. Don't feel like you have to present your pain, your concerns, your valid in a beautiful, pretty box and put it in front of somebody and say, okay, is that valid? Is that okay? What are we thinking? Let yourself be messy. Get it out. You don't have to keep it all together and pretty and composed. And I think the first step is allowing yourself to validate your own experience. All of us could experience the exact same thing. It might make me angry, it might make Judy sad, it might make the rest of you guys happy. So we cannot look at the same experience and say, this is how you should respond, this is how it should impact you, and this is what you should do with it. It's allowing yourself to get it out in a safe space, be messy, and allow yourself to truly just say, this is how this made me feel before you can take any further step of healing. Because if you're fighting yourself that hard, it's going to be hard when it's like, hey, these next steps of healing are going to require you to have your own personal conviction. It's going to require you to have your own personal compass. But if we're fighting ourselves, we can't get to the root of, what do I
Mm,
actually want? Where do
mhm,
I actually want to go? Because I'm still fighting myself to validate my experience.
mm,
I'd like to add something. I think one of God's greatest gifts of love is that he enables us to see with clarity
Hmm.
as we're ready to see.
mm, mm. When we're
Mm.
And I
ready.
think, yeah,
Mhm.
Because I
and I think
I
that's
was
the
just
greatest gift of love
yeah.
that we can have. It's available when we're ready, is to see with clarity what's gone on, how do we correct it, how do we become, how do we overcome that whole thing.
Okay, really quick. Over 7,000 people watch Generations Woven every month, but only a tiny percentage of you are actually subscribed. If you've ever watched an episode and thought, wow, I needed that, please hit subscribe. It's free and it takes 2 seconds, and it genuinely helps us grow, bring on amazing guests, and reach more women looking for connection, healing, and real conversations. Thank you. I think that leads directly kind of into this question of what would you say to the women who are starting to ask questions, but are honestly terrified of those answers and what they might mean for their life, their family? Like, as I mean, I know in my past, I suppressed maybe the feeling of where I was in my marriage, right? So I got divorced. I was married for 14 years. It didn't take 14 years for me to just one day be like, I want a divorce. There were obviously things and patterns through that that I avoided or ignored or acted like weren't a problem because I knew like I'm just here in this marriage and this is what I have to do. But I think what I did was I also ultimately avoided the truth in some things and just accepted it. But I didn't realize that, right? Like I kept it inside. I didn't talk about it to anybody. Nobody knew I was having these feelings and I hid them until I popped. And why? Well, I guess, what would you say to somebody who's like not coming out and talking to people about that, but like inside they're about to pop and they just don't know it? I guess what would be your advice for somebody who's scared of actually asking those questions?
I think my advice to them would be that you are not worth sacrificing on the altar of someone else's comfortability.
Oh my gosh. Wow. Wow.
That it's okay to pursue autonomy for yourself. I think as women, we are societally raised and in religious spheres to be the ultimate absorber. And
Mm,
but in kind of what you're explaining, it's like the sponge can't absorb anymore. And
yeah.
that fork in the road is so scary because the fork in the road is to choose self. And as women, that feels so selfish because our jobs are
Mm-hmm.
to be nurturers and absorbers and
Hmm.
multitaskers. And there's almost like a pat on the back of how much can you endure?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because
And
I think that choosing
yeah.
self, right? Choosing
Mm.
it sooner, even in that relationship, because, my reflection was that if I would have recognized where I was suppressing my feelings or my desires sooner, there could have been conversations, right? Like I mean, and I know different relationships are different. There's not every relationship can you have that open conversation. I probably could have, but because of who I was and the traumas probably throughout my life that I dealt with, I never opened up. So I had, situations where I felt like I couldn't go and do things without him getting anxious. And so I just wouldn't do it because I was like, I don't want to deal with how he's going to react. Hindsight, I could have had like honest, true conversations or even went into some sort of therapy and been like, this is how I feel when you do this. But I never did that. I just closed up. And I think that's something is in earlier parts of our relationships, why it's so important to be more open and have these conversations so you don't get to the point where you're like, okay, I'm done. And that's what I found. I mean, just sharing like through my relationship now, I've been with for I think it's like 4 years. We're going almost 4 years. Um, is like we talk and I tell him exactly like, okay, this is what happened last night. I did not like this. I do not want this, again. Like, what can we do about this? And I would have never said that in my first marriage. Maybe that would have been what saved it, right? Like maybe. It's so different now. But I guess as women, what keeps us holding everything in? Like why can't we why do we have to wait until we have these like huge life experiences like the divorce or uplifting like just huge changes, right? Like I had 2 kids and my whole life got turned upside down when I finally realized it. Like how do we do things better younger maybe or
I think,
anytime?
yeah, I mean, I think some of this comes from, again, being very honest on, so a lot of like, even in relation, there's so many routes. So I'm going to try to collect my thoughts here for a moment because there's so many things here. But I think as women too, it's our worth and our value is directly tied to the reflection of those around us. And so it's like I'm almost a mirror. So like if my spouse is like, not doing so great or frustrating or embarrassing, it's a direct reflection of me. And so instead of me going to that person saying, here's how I'm feeling, here's how this is impacting me, it's more like I just go into like fix it mode of what more do I need to absorb? What more do I need to do? Because it's almost like I can't handle, if my kids are a mess and my husband's a mess, like that equals I'm a mess. And so we always
Mm-hmm.
just go internal. We're very uncomfortable going external. And a lot of that comes from some of the male misogyny in society and how things are portrayed to us. Another like side note with that is attachment styles. So we can be obviously in a secure attachment, we can be in an anxious attachment, or we can be in an avoidant attachment. And we're in an attachment in all of our different relationships. We might be anxious with one and we might be avoidant with another. But how we interact and how we attach to other people, that foundation is laid in childhood. So a lot of therapists, it's kind of like some therapists don't want to go back. I'm always going to go back because that's where the roadmap started. So I remember even my therapist, when I started working with her, she asked me, what was your entry into the world like? And I'm like, oh, if I knew, ha ha ha. And she goes, no, for real. Were you planned? Did you grow up were you born into a family where your parents were together? Were you in the NICU? Were you adopted? Did you grow up in a home where there was substance abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse? From the time we're in the womb to the time we're born, our nervous systems are tracking, is the world safe? Is the world not safe? And our parents and the relationships we have around us are laying the foundation of how honest can I be? How open can I be? How safe is the world? And so that lays the foundation for our attachment style. So for me, I'm very anxious of if energy shifts in the room, if I can perceive that somebody's going to be angry, disappointed, upset, I get anxious and I'm emotionally chasing that person down because my security and comfortability comes from them being secure and comfortable. And if they're upset with me or they're not secure, they're not comfortable, I can't be okay. And so a lot of times in these marriage relationships, it's like, yeah, we're just anxious and avoidant and we're worried about being too much. We're worried about asking too much. And that probably was reinforced in childhood, in early relationships. So I know that's kind of a long answer, but I think that's why some women avoid some of that as well.
So
Don't you think a lot of women put up stuff a lot because they're afraid of abandonment or being alone?
Absolutely. I remember my therapist saying to me, why are you so uncomfortable rolling the dice on yourself? Like doing a little free fall? Like, why does that make you so uncomfortable? And it's like, well, because from childhood, it's been reiterated that a family is success, a marriage is success, children are a success. And so how can I be successful outside of those things? You're telling me on my own, I could find success, fulfillment, and more health. That feels like a failure.
Exactly.
So yeah.
Oh, wow.
And to go back to what you said about you being an anxious attachment. So now that you have identified that, right, through your journey that you've been on, how do you handle it when you notice yourself doing that? If you have somebody near you and you start to get anxious, what have you learned as a mechanism to help you from going down that slippery slope that is so natural to us to be able to kind of like trigger like, oop, here's what I'm doing. I need to do this differently.
I think part of it is, like I was kind of saying earlier, is that internal narrative of when I feel that anxiety start to come up, I don't need to absorb it and push it down. It's okay for me to communicate. I'm actually not being aggressive. I'm being assertive. And so I'll let the other person know, hey, I just wanted to let you know I'm feeling like something is off and I'd love to talk about it. Now,
Oh,
again, there might be relationships where the other person doesn't know how to engage with that. But
mhm,
for me, it was like when I first went through my divorce, I moved back in with my parents and was getting
mhm,
my master's and was in my childhood bedroom at 29 years old. And that was the best playground of trying all these things out because I had perceived safety with my parents. And a lot of those childhood wounds of the anxious attachment my parents were fantastic, but some of that came from them. And so when we find relationships where we have perceived safety, it's like the conversations are like, hey, mom, I can feel like something's off. You slammed the door. I'm feeling nervous. What's going on? Can we talk through it? And then we're able to have conversation. It's the internalizing, the pushing down, and the holding that reiterates, I can't talk about it. It's too much, and I need to absorb. And we need to wring the sponge out. And so a lot of times that comes from, as women, realizing I'm not being aggressive by saying how I feel or how something impacts me. Someone else can feel like it is aggressive, but I can hold space for myself and say, no, I'm not
No.
being aggressive. I'm allowing myself to get this out and to talk about it because I cannot hold it in any longer.
Mm.
Brooke, you need to write a book. I mean, the sayings, it's such practical advice that you're giving. But all four of us are moms. And we talk about breaking generational cycles, things that we've learned from our parents and that they've probably learned from theirs. What beliefs do you hope that the next generation of women will absolutely refuse to inherit? And kind of piggybacking on that, how can we teach? We all have daughters. How can we teach specifically our daughters to trust themselves in a world that often encourage them not to?
Yeah.
Mm.
Oh, that like that question in and of itself makes me emotional just because I have so much hope for the next generation. And I want change. Like, and that's what I think is so beautiful about this conversation, like that this conversation's even happening in and of itself. I tell clients all the time, I'm like, 80, like in the 80s, we couldn't even get a credit card. Like, we actually have evolved quite a bit, like in a short amount of
Yeah.
time, but there's still so much evolvement to go. And so I think you kind of hit on that a bit of, I think one thing that I want the next generation to know is that like your thoughts and your questions are not too much. That internal narrative, that voice, some call it the Holy Spirit, some call it the internal voice, whatever that is, ground yourself and connect with that. I think,
Mm,
especially if we look at this from like, I'm going to say women in a spiritual lens, I don't think it was intentional harm at all. But I think from a very young age for me and other women, there is this feeling of you need to doubt that inner voice, that you're inherently bad, that you're inherently sexual, that you're inherently a temptress, that you cannot trust that inner voice because of sin and shame and guilt. And it's just this reiteration of you cannot trust self. But when
mhm,
we're not grounded and rooted with ourselves and with that internal voice, it makes us susceptible to emotional abuse, sexual abuse, physical abuse, because I'm needing someone to externalize and validate my experience, or I'm needing someone else to tell me where I'm allowed to go or what I'm allowed to do. And so, like, even with my daughter, if she tells me something doesn't feel good, like to her, whether it's something I'm saying or a conversation or behavior, it's praising and reiterating and just like praising the heebie jeebies out of it. I love that you told me that. Thank you for telling me that that didn't feel good. Thank you for telling me that you didn't like that. Like, letting women know you can share what does or does not feel good to you. You are
mhm,
not inherently evil or bad or this sexual being. Like, you, from the beginning, it feels like we're put in a bucket of we're good or we're bad. And it's
mhm,
just very
mhm,
black and white and it's very all or nothing. So I think that would be one of the biggest things is like you can trust yourself. You can trust how you feel, how your body's responding. You are logical, you are reasonable, like you have these skills in you, you are strong. And you, even like we talked about, you can do stuff on your own. Like you can be independent and you can roll the dice on yourself. I know
mhm,
that's a lot of different answers, but there's so much there. But I think that would be a lot of the direction.
I mean, no, it's beautiful because it is.
mhm,
It's us wanting to help that next generation, but also help our own, right? There's so
mhm,
much that we've talked about recently, even just us in the last 6 months of these conversations that we have together and how much we've changed, but also bringing in, other people to it and making you find like not making you, but everyone needs somebody. And it may not, maybe it's not your spouse that you can have this type of conversation with. Maybe it's a friend, maybe it's a sibling, somebody, but you need to find somebody that you can have real, meaningful conversations with, because I think that's where it helps us change the dialogue from all these negative things that we always talk about, or the complaining or the gossip, and turning it into self-fulfilling conversations where we can have true, meaningful dialogue that actually is deeper than the surface level, how are you? And I think it's just that's what's important about, what we're trying to build with Generations Woven or our in-person events, is like bringing women together and having a conversation that's a little bit deeper.
Our whole idea in the beginning for the three of us coming together was to share stories from a different generational perspective. And we had a session, and those episodes will be coming out soon, about what was okay for Judy's generation to say and not to say, for Tasha's and for mine. And I'm in a generation X, and we didn't really do the let's talk about it and see how you're feeling. And I have a daughter that is in a generation where they do feel very differently than we did. And I feel very not equipped to deal with that, because my standard answer would be something like, well, we're talking about facts, not feelings. But for them to be able to say, Mom, I can see something is not okay with you, like your example of slamming the door, and then teaching me to be a little more open to how I just reacted, and that I am
Mm.
not paying attention to what she's actually really feeling. And that's the one thing about this generation's woven that we found, that typically we always kind of look down on the next generation, thinking, but we have the answers, we survived, we're good. But no, we are, of course, we're good. We've gone through some stuff that they probably never will. But we can learn from each other, from the younger generation up to the generation that's still alive. And this is a way how I think if we're open, we can ask those questions, like you said, when you start trusting your feelings, for the older generation to say, okay, hold on. They have validity in what they're feeling and saying. Let me be big enough to acknowledge that and listen to that.
Mm.
Yeah. And I think if you are having that conversation, like you said, it's like it approaching it in a way of, we don't need to shame up or down either generation. It's to say the amazingness of how each generation keeps learning, and the building blocks that were set by Judy's generation, and each of our generations can build on one another. Part of previous generations, that's why we're having this conversation now. And so I think it's, even as women, not attacking and coming at each other, but looking at the different versions of womanhood and saying they're building on each other. I'm able to have this conversation because of this. Even in my
Yeah.
own family, it's like, yeah, are there things that I wish that I would have had in childhood? But for me to sit and let the bitterness overcome is not helpful, in the sense of, I have so much in front of me. What can I do with it? Even a silly example of like, with my daughter, like I'm teaching just the autonomy of, do you want to give someone a hug when you leave the family gathering? Does that feel good to you? And if not, that's not a meter of how much you love grandma or grandpa or your aunts and uncles. It's just, are you comfortable with showing your love in that way? And so my daughter has a great grandma, and it has been beautiful. Like when I was a kid, we all kind of have those experiences where, you got to hug and you got to kiss everybody. And for me as a kid, that made me
Yes.
uncomfortable. I didn't like it, but I
Yeah.
didn't want to push the system. So now with my daughter, Hattie, everyone meets her with, what feels good to you? Do you want to give a hug, or do you want to give a high five, or do you just want to walk out the door? And she will, in the full room with her full voice, say, I'm in the mood to give hugs today. I'd like to give hugs. And everybody receives her, so there's so much growth and beauty of my generation, my mom, her mom, and now my daughter, of extending that autonomy and meeting one another with respect and understanding. We don't have to shame grandma or mom. We can still have empathy and understanding, and we can shift the tide and move together.
Brooke, where were you when I was a child? Because we had to full blown kiss on the lips. And I grew up in South Africa, and that is just what we did. And I'm sure probably Judy, I don't know, you or Tasha have the same experience. But and you know what? This is the thing that's so amazing about faith. We have discernment. Watch little kids. they are untainted by the world when they're that little. So they might know that I'm not going to give you a hug because something doesn't sit right in my spirit. They might not phrase it like that, but they know something is not totally okay. And if they had a mom like you saying, honey, you can give a big five, you can give a fist bump, that's okay. It doesn't mean you love them less.
And
Amazing.
and
Yeah.
so
Amazing.
many women come into my office that have experienced sexual abuse because of that uncomfortability of I didn't want to say, or maybe I said yes, but I really wanted to revert my yes,
Right.
or putting that on themselves of if we raise this next generation of women to not view that as being aggressive or too much, that I tell women all the time of what happened to you is not the result of you not doing enough or not being enough. It's the fact that society reiterates to you that your autonomy is aggressive, and it's not. If you're with someone sexually and you're in the middle of it and you want it to stop, no is no. You don't need to apologize. You don't need to regress. No is no. If you're wearing a low cut top and it's not considered modest and someone makes an inappropriate gesture to you, that's not your shame to absorb. That's on them for not respecting your autonomy. And so many women that have these religious backgrounds are so susceptible to certain types of abuse because autonomy is viewed as aggressiveness and it's not.
Mm-hmm.
And God wants us to have autonomy. So,
Mm-hmm. I think he
yeah.
also wants us not to wear low-cut tops. So people can
Yeah.
make comments like that. But
Yes. Yes.
yes, you're right. Yeah.
Yeah.
When you were talking about like what you're teaching your daughter with the hugging, it just made me think that even in my adult work, like in work, um, people are huggers and some people aren't. And I remember even having to like use my words and be like, I'm not a hugger. I shouldn't have had to justify myself because I think and maybe some people just like, they just automatically go to hugging.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm more of a hugger now than I used to be though. I have like I think I've gone through seasons where, I grew up my mom might have like said I love you more than my dad, but it wasn't like a daily thing. Like we didn't say like I love you, goodbye, anything like that. We didn't give hugs. And so as I grew up, I was like I wasn't a hugger and nobody really forced me to hug that I can remember, but I just remember having to make an excuse by saying I'm not a hugger instead of I could have just been like, I could have just put my hand out and shook their hand instead of like accepting the hug. But I almost felt like I had to justify or make a statement about it. I don't know. That just came to my head as you were talking about what you're teaching your daughter, which is beautiful. And I did not teach my kids that. It was like, go give grandma, grandpa a hug goodbye. I did
Yeah.
make
And
them kiss on the
kiss them
lips
on the
though.
lip.
No kiss on the lips. Like, do not kiss my children on the lips, please. But hugs
Yes.
were, because I think maybe I wanted my kids to be a little bit more loving than maybe I thought I was because I didn't hug. So maybe that was my reverse, like, give hugs because I didn't give hugs. So
We're such projects and products of our past, and we don't have to be. That's not who we are necessarily.
Yeah. And I think that's where some of a little bit like you guys mentioned, the internal family systems perspective, like in therapy, where that kind of comes from is I tell clients it's almost like if you take a stone and you throw it into water and you see all of the ripples around the stone. Those are all the different parts that we hold inside of us. So it's not parts of like multiple personality. It's different parts of us that experience different traumas. Like I've kind of said before, the little T trauma, maybe somebody on the playground said something hurtful about your appearance. It didn't, alter you forever, but it stung a bit. You're like, I didn't love that little T trauma. And then we know big T traumas are more, the sexual, emotional, physical abuse, neglect, things of that nature. So I think even for all of us as we're talking, it is like, yeah, there are like, for Tasha, there might be that 10-year-old part of you that holds part of that piece of, I wanted to say no, but it felt aggressive. And so when you see people hug or you see people, force some of that like physical contact of a goodbye, there is a part that you hold inside of you that is a younger part of yourself that's why that feeling's coming up. A lot of times when people feel triggered, when they have a certain smell, they see a person, they drive by a certain
Mm-hmm.
place, it's like, what is that? Like, why is this coming up for me? And it's like, well,
Mm-hmm.
It's probably because it's not just Brooke in the here and now, it's the ripple of the stone in the water and all the different parts that are wanting to have voice and wanting to say things because they're holding different types of trauma, good, bad experiences. And so that internal family systems is really helpful of how do I have conversation with these
Mm,
younger parts of myself so they can still experience healing. Brooke in the here and now can heal, but 9-year-old Brooke can actually still heal as well if we can go
mhm.
back and have conversation of what did she need, what did she want to say, and what did she feel like she didn't get.
Wow. Just
That's
talking
good.
about healing, what would you say is one misconception about healing that you just wish most people
Mm.
understood?
I think the biggest misconception, and I have bought into this misconception, is that when I'm out of whatever it may be, my abuse, my environment, whatever thing that I can identify is the impact of what's harming me, when I'm away from it, I'll be healed. And
Instantly.
yes, and we almost shame
Wow.
ourselves of, "Ugh, why don't I feel better? I left the environment, I left the
Yeah.
person," and we almost attack ourselves for the healing of I have said so many times to my therapist and friends on the phone of just like, I almost hate myself at times of, "Why does this still get to me?" And it's like, because healing, it's a journey, it's a
Yeah.
progression, and being slow and soft and empathetic, but I think women think, I leave the environment and I almost feel bad that it's still hurting me or that it's still, I don't want to bring it up because I should
Yeah.
be over it and I'm not over it. So
Mhm,
I don't want to bring it
mhm.
up. So,
Yeah. I heard somebody said once, it is literally like an onion, and you keep on peeling back the layers after layers, and hopefully you'll get to that nucleus part
yeah,
where you're ready to let it go. But I think a part of that, I don't want to say becomes your identity, but you have that gift that you can speak to others about it because you've gone through it.
Mhm.
But I just
Yeah.
hope for all the women out there that we get to that little itty bitty part of the onion, like the little piece of the onion sooner than later, and that it's never too late.
Well, I think that's why you've got to be intentional with that question of like, why did that trigger me?
Mm,
Recently I had some in person meetings and something was said. They were like, well, this team said this thing and I got defensive. I was like, well, what did they say? Like, what was the exact scenario? Because I wanted to go figure it out and solve it and like defend it because it seemed like an attack on my team. And the person was like, you don't need to get defensive. I'm just telling you
wow.
what was said. And I'm like, ugh, you're right. Like I look back and it's that I want to protect me and I want to protect my team and like what people think of me and my perception. And so I go back to they're thinking that I'm not good enough or I'm not doing well enough. So it's that intentionality to be able to identify that you're triggered and then to think about it because you can be triggered and ignore it. And I think that's where Judy has taught me this in when we first started and we had like little things and Judy had, for a bit, she kept saying to both me and Narina, and then we would say it back to her, which was really fun. And she'd be like, why is that triggering you? Like, why did that bother you so much? And then you're like, oh, I just got called out. I don't know. And so it's helped me to be able to identify why I'm being triggered and be
Mm.
more intentional in that. So I think that's great what you said, Brooke. But I think that we just need to be intentional to identify it and then think about it and reflect instead of pushing past like we usually do and suppressing it down.
And one of the other great Judaisms that we use a lot is she'll say, well, who has the problem? Because it's easy to say, well, and blame someone else. But when the problem is really not them, it's you not having dealt with something, you get to the point where it's like, I still have this problem. And I need to be able to, still work on it or sit with it. But it definitely helps to not do the blame game and say, no, they were mean, it's them. It's like, no, you still have the problem, ma'am.
There's
So,
something. There's a little bit of
yeah,
truth to what people say, right? Like
correct.
not always in some cases when they say mean comments, but there is usually truth if somebody is bringing
Yeah,
something up to you.
sure.
And so you have to think about it a little differently and be like, okay, some type of perception is there.
Mhm.
Let's move forward on this and see what tools I can use to
Absolutely.
make it better.
and how we move past and work through trauma, like when you experience a trauma, is when you can experience something similar or remnant to the pain, but in a safe way. So, like with Judy, it sounds like she has that relational safety and equity with both of you. And so she's able to have conversations and point things out in a way that is not painful because
Mm-hmm.
there's safety with Judy. Now, if it was
Mm-hmm.
somebody, a past caretaker, somebody where there's not that safety, those comments are probably going to just ricochet and have pain. It's the same thing of like if we experience a relationship where we've been abused, we do the healing, we do the work, we reframe how can I find a safe, healthy partner? And then we put ourselves out there to experience and see, can I experience a relationship in a safe and a healthy way? And that's how we move past the trauma is we have more experiences of safety than we do of the unsafe. And we start to build resiliency that way.
Mm-hmm.
Who
Mm-hmm.
is okay, so I've got two questions. One, who is responsible for your healing? And two, does it require somebody else to apologize?
Mm.
Okay, so
Wow.
will you ask me the first question again?
Yes. Who is responsible for your healing?
So obviously, I'm going to go with like I'm responsible for my healing. It is a conscious choice of healing. We can be thinking that we're healing and not actually be healing. So
Mm-hmm.
even though that feels like, wow, like it is a conscious choice because that's why it's almost like the stages of grief of like
Mm.
when I'm healing, I am actually grieving. And divorce
Mm,
specifically is a weird grief because it doesn't involve a death. That person is still alive and
Yeah.
around. So it takes conscious choice, but it is like the stages of grieving. There might be times where I'm bargaining and I'm depressed, and then I flip over to the anger and I move back. So it's like part of the healing is like, yeah, I'm going to let myself feel the feels like we talked about earlier. But at some point, I have to make conscious choice to heal and allow myself to experience something new and different on the other side. It is my responsibility. I
Mm-hmm.
don't want to be that tornado that comes into the room of, here she comes again because she's not working on it. She's not like that is on me. And I can have these supports in this community, but it is conscious choice that I have to make of I might not ever receive that apology.
Yeah.
It might not ever come. And
Mm-hmm.
if it doesn't come, I can choose to be angry and upset about it. But over time, that will erode me on the inside.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I've had to choose that of that apology, systems, relationships, it will probably never come for me. And there will probably always be met with a defense and a deflection. And so I've had to make conscious choice of, but I can still validate that it did happen, that it wasn't okay, and then I can move past it. There's a really like feeling that I get of like I am healing. That's me taking my power back. Is that I'm like replanting myself somewhere else, and I'm going to grow even taller and bigger and stronger. And sometimes that feeling is like, yeah, I love that.
I love that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Wow, this has been an incredible conversation. And we kind of alluded to this a little bit, but I do want to ask you this question, especially in the time that we're living in right now. There's a lot of exposure of church hurt. So for you, after experiencing one of the probably most painful seasons in your life within a church setting, what do you believe the church in America right now most need to hear?
I feel like what the church in America needs to hear the most right now is that part of this healing and being able to help break some of these cycles of the pain and the hurt that is coming is being very honest and real that part of the system and the way that they operate, that they're actually generating the very hurt that they want to combat, if that makes sense.
It
So
does.
it's almost like, we see these broken relationships, these broken marriages, we see things like abuse, and we see, people struggling with substance or whatever that may be. And the church having a very honest conversation with itself of, if I really want to help healing and I want there to be vulnerability and I want there to be acceptance and safety, is the way that we are operating, is that actually being extended to people? or are we
Big.
actually further perpetrating the problem?
Mhm.
Meaning, like we've kind of talked about, of some of the purity culture, some of the conversations, some of the expectations on women are actually further adding to some of the oppression and the brokenness and the abuse. It's reiterating you cannot trust yourself. You are broken, you are fallen, you can't trust that inner voice. And it creates these cycles and dynamics where it's actually just we're stuck in this loop of we have this hurt from the church isn't comfortable, they don't know how to have the conversation, whether
Mhm.
that's
Mhm.
theology, whether that's letting go of leadership, whether that's re-looking at how we're doing this. And it's this perpetual cycle. Imagine if there was church hurt and a pastor got up, and I know there's pastors out there that have done that, but imagine if there was that vulnerability of, I don't want to be a part of that. I'm sorry that that happened. We want to change this. We want to relook at it. And instead, it feels like the church struggles at times of what do we do when some of the culpability and the abuse and the brokenness might be on our hands. We cannot avoid and suppress it down. We have to relook at how are we operating that's adding to this problem and what do we need to redo with it. So
Absolutely. And I think there's an accountability that the church has to take. Um, it it has been said that a church is a place like a hospital for broken sinners, and we all are broken in some way. But that is the last place that is allowed to inflict pain on others. That's not what the church is supposed to be. But that there is accountability even for those in leadership. And it can be done in a godly way. You don't want to blame and shame, but there is repercussions, and maybe they need healing. So just even asking that question, that's not how I was raised. You don't talk about things like that. But I think it's good to say they are humans too. They have faults just like we do. But if we're going to heal, if all of us are going to heal, then we have to look at our leadership as well in churches today.
and I think seeing that vulnerability is powerful for people to see. And I think that the church wants it. And I know that when Christ walks this earth, that's what also pushed me into therapy. And I actually feel more connected and close with God in therapy because there's just this baseline in therapy of vulnerability. There's a safety, and it has to be built. But I think the church wants that too. I think the church wants to have that safety, and I think that it's possible. But I think, like you were saying, it comes from how is the system and the leadership in and of itself being held accountable for restoration, for healing? And right now, I think that there's not a clear cut direction on how the church is handling that. And so people just leave the system as a whole because it's
Yeah,
presenting not safe. So I need to
exactly.
go find safety. Yeah.
Mark, this has been an amazing conversation, I'm sure, for Tasha and Judy as well. And thank you for all the really incredible quips that you gave us today. I feel like you need to capture them in a book because there are people that need to hear this.
Hopefully someday we'll see.
And the fact that you're connecting two really important things for me specifically is church and religion and God, and then helping women. Those two, I think you have just the pivotal um, job of doing something so needed in society right now. So thank you for not being stuck and just walking away from God.
I think I appreciate you reiterating that because I'm like, I think it was very scary for my family and it's been hard. Like I haven't led worship, I haven't played my guitar, I haven't sang. Like that's still a part of my healing is like maybe someday that will come back around, but just letting myself trust the process of if it never comes back around, that's not a flaw in me. It's okay. Like, and I think even when I have clients come in, it's like I'm not a Christian therapist. I'm a therapist who's a Christian. So if they bring spirituality to me, it's out on the table. And so it's just been really cool of I think sometimes the deconstruction people have seen it one way, which is don't trust churches, don't trust God. And for me, it's
Uh,
like I'm deconstructing, but I'm pointing people still back to Christ. And it is possible to do both at the same time. So
Absolutely. You're evangelizing, while you're having a therapy session. But I want to leave you with an interesting perception on worship. And I've seen a pattern, and it's I think it's by design. So you know that Lucifer was the angel of light, and he was a worshiper. So he goes for the worshipers. I attended a church one time where the worship leader had an affair with somebody in administration at a church. And the pastor, who I have never seen a pastor like that in my whole life, called his family, his children, and him, brought them out in a service, called him. And then I'm sure, they've gone through sessions, but he knew, and they knew that it was coming, called him to the stage, said that this was wrong, that he has apologized. But I mean, I sat in that service and I have never seen something like that in my life. But the accountability of him wronging in a leadership position is something that I will never forget in my life. And do churches do that today? No. Did they do it?
Some might,
Yes.
some could, but
You know what? I think that is not typically what some do. I mean, the church that I go have no problem with the truth because we need a place where we can speak truth, biblical truth. But it's not common, and people are concerned about: are you going to stay in my church? Am I going to have your tithing because I
well,
need that? I need to
Narina,
thrive.
though, is that kind of where, and I'm asking your perspective. I know you go to a much smaller, more intimate
Correct.
church, right?
Yes.
Versus like the mega church that may
Mm.
be more of the financial gains is their goal, right? Versus the true passion. I don't know. Like, what are your thoughts, Narina? Do you think it's more like the smaller churches versus like the mega churches and like those?
Well, think of it this way. I would think that a small church really needs their tithing to
Yeah.
survive, whereas a big
Yeah.
church love the lavish lifestyles they have, and because of people tithing, they can afford that. So I would think that a smaller church would probably think that it makes more sense to keep quiet because they want to keep their membership. We have
Mm,
lost people in our church because of speaking the truth. And if you, for instance, if you're in leadership and you commit a sin, and there are different kinds of sins, but if you're sleeping with your ex-husband or with a boyfriend and you're married, you will be asked to repent and stop that because people are looking up to you and they think that that behavior is okay. And if you don't, you will be asked to step away from leadership. And if you still don't, you'll be asked to leave the church. They do it. That's what they do. Is it common? I don't know. But I think the church needs to be moving back to, if there's a problem, they're held at a higher, it's just a different standard. Then if that is too hard for you, then go get a 9 to 5 job somewhere else.
Yes, the
You know what
church.
I just realized? The healthier and more functional a church is, no matter what the size, the bigger the impact it has on families to be more healthy and functional.
mm,
I like that. But
mm.
that is where the enemy gets family, and he gets the fathers first. And when we are aware of the devices that he uses, like the worshipers, he goes for the worshipers. And Brooke, that might be something for you to think about, that he is stealing from you, because I haven't even heard you sing, but I bet you are the light and have a beautiful voice. And he is stealing from you and keeping you silent. And when you are ready one day to take up that guitar again, invite us. We would love to come to your
Oh,
church and hear that. I would love that.
I appreciate that because I think
I think July 18th would be a wonderful debut.
Come to
I'll
our
do it
coffee and
again.
connection,
Coffee
and
connection.
she can
Ah,
do our opening.
well,
Yeah.
I like that.
Here's
I
the
just,
thing I will say. I will never say never. And I think it's something where when I feel that safety in that environment for
Yeah,
you know what I mean? I think that's what I'm
absolutely.
waiting
But
for.
just know that that
Yeah.
is very typical of what the enemy does.
Yeah.
And when you're ready, let us
Mm.
know.
So, if today's conversation spoke to you, don't let it end here. Take one small step today. Ask the question you've been afraid to ask, reach out to somebody you trust, or simply remind yourself that your story matters. Your voice matters, and healing is possible. We've all healed in some way, somehow, and we're still healing. I
Mhm.
think we heal for the rest of our lives personally. If this episode encouraged you, share it with another woman who may need to hear it. Until next time, God bless.
There's an